Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar session, What's New in Work Packaging? Constraint Management with O3. My name is Mandy Coker, and I'm the VP of Education and Engagement for O3 Solutions. I have a few reminders before we get started. Every registered attendee will receive a copy of today's presentation slides and a link to the final recording. We'll also post today's webinar recording on our website along with previously recorded events that you might want to check out in our education library. You can find that at www.o3.solutions. So for our agenda today, as I mentioned earlier, today's session will cover constraint management. We will walk through some of the basics, the stakeholders that are involved, constraint workflows, and some reporting concepts. We'll have a time at the end for a brief Q&A session after the presentation concludes. On our website via the chat button in the lower right-hand corner. You can submit your questions, and our presenter for today, Mike Hellinga, and others on our project management team will be available to answer any questions you may have about constraint management, O3, or any pieces of our software. So we want to get it started today with a safety moment. Now, I know everyone has been inundated with health and wellness safety moments just due to where we are right now in some of the things that are happening in our world today. But we wanted to take another look at what we could be doing on the health and wellness side. And something we wanted to bring to your attention is how you might be having to manage change. So people are working from home a lot more than normal. We're having to find new and innovative ways to communicate with each other as we're in this sequestration with the coronavirus. So I wanted to share some reminders for you. First, I really think it's a good thing to find the positive in the situation. It may be hard right now, but I assure you there are some things there. One of the things you might want to do is familiarize yourself with anything that might be changing and make a list of what's new. You should also consider the impact that any change might have on yourself and others. So it's not just you that are having to go through this, and you definitely aren't alone. If you do have questions or concerns, be sure that those are productive questions. Ask helpful things that might make the situation better. Also, challenge head on. Take control of the situation. Don't let any kind of change overcome you, and focus on the positive, how that change might work for you. And last but certainly not least, exercise patience. Change is not easy, and sometimes it isn't fun. And so you really need to make sure that you have patience with yourself and others. So this is something I wanted to talk about today because of everything we're having to go through with the coronavirus. But these reminders are always good anytime you have to face a major change in your life. So with that, I want to introduce today's speaker. Mike Hellinga is a project manager for the client success team at O3. Mike has over 10 years of experience in construction, with 5 of those focused on agile project management and construction software. I really want to thank you for joining us today, Mike, remotely, of course, social distancing, and sharing some of the new things that O3 has been working on. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Mandy, and welcome from my home office in social quarantine. As you said, my name is Mike Hellinga. I'm a project manager with O3. And in today's webinar, we are going to be discussing constraints, but not just constraints, how to manage those constraints, and then, of course, how constraint management with O3. We're going to show you how this is going to make life easier for the WorkFace Planner, used through accountability, process support, increased productivity, better collaboration, increased efficiency, and decision support. As project manager, I have worked with many projects to implement the O3 application. Through this experience, I have helped clients to automate and standardize their work process. The one thing that they all have in common is constraint management. I'd also like to say that O3 has been battle tested in the field with over 200,000 work packages created and executed to date. And I like to say that I've also had a large part in most of those packages. So first, to discuss the constraints, we need to understand AWP and what it means to O3. So AWP, or Advanced Work Packaging, is the overall process that details the flow of all work packages for a project, including construction, engineering, and installation work packages. And of course, for more complex projects, there are some other package types that could be included. AWP is a planned executable process that begins with initial planning and continues through detailed design and construction execution. It provides the framework for productive and efficient construction and incorporates a construction execution plan. So we know what AWP is, but what does that mean to O3? Well, O3 is a software solution designed for industrial construction projects and purpose-built to support AWP projects. O3 is a cloud-based application that provides oversight, visibility, and automation, all necessary for the successful implementation of the advanced work packaging. Also, being a cloud-based application, it is accessible from anywhere with real-time data. So why do we need to know AWP is to discuss constraints? Well, CII describes constraint management as a particular best practice that supports work packaging and work-based planning. So what is a constraint? We have a definition here, but the constraints are something that impedes the progress towards an object or goal. In an AWP, an example of an object or goal would be a work package. So we know what a constraint is. How do we manage constraints? Well, the management of constraints is the process of creating, updating, and completing items that impedes a project's process or goals. Good constraint management is going to provide oversight, visibility, and automation. So to sum that up, work packaging and constraint management are part of a process that will remove the guesswork by defining the scope of work. This will help with consistency, accountability, and reliability. So that all sounds good, but why should we use constraint management? Well, through better planning and scheduling, along with awareness, you're going to help to identify potential issues. By identifying those potential issues, you're going to increase productivity, reduce costs, and something that I hear on every one of my projects as the #1 goal, increase safety. Well, what is an actual constraint? There are several different examples of constraint that we can run through. Here are a couple for examples that I see commonly on all my projects. On a CWA, you're going to have permits and safety requirements. On an engineering work package, you may have drawings. A construction work package, you may have materials. And on installation work packages, which in my experience is the main focus of constraint management, you could have all the above. Or you could also have other IWPs as constraints. So now we know why you would want to use constraint management. How can O3 help with this process? O3 is going to be able to offer more accountability by providing an easy way to manage constraint ownership. It also offers process support through constraint workflows designed around real-world experiences. It'll help increase productivity with task management and organization. It's going to offer better collaboration by utilizing O3 Specialized Constraint review and meeting tools, and increase efficiency with automated constraint data collection and accessibility. And lastly, it'll improve decision support through reporting and analytics. So who needs to be involved in constraint management? We've broken this down into 4 categories of people. First is WorkFace Planner. WorkFace Planner is generally a defined role on a project, and those planners are going to manage work packages and identify constraints for other work packages. They'll manage a sequence of work packages for each contractor and discipline. They're also going to be responsible for rescheduling packages for release if work is impacted by any unclear constraints. Next, we have a construction manager, also generally a defined role on most projects. Construction managers are going to keep track of the plan versus actual start dates for all work packages. They're going to help monitor the quantities held up by constraints to help with prioritization, because they're the ones that understand the impact and criticality of all open constraints. Now, after a constraint manager, we have another category called constraint owner. With constraint owner, you're going to see some overlap with a WorkFace Planner and construction manager. A constraint owner can be anyone working in any capacity on the project. However, whoever it is, an owner is needed for all constraints. This is because owners are going to be responsible for clearing their assigned constraints, as well as providing details and updates on the constraint removal process. So the last category is a WorkFace planning lead, which may not be defined on a project at all, but everybody is going to have a planning lead, whether you know it or not. A planning lead is one that's going to run the weekly constraint review meeting with the owner and contractors. They'll discuss any new constraints, provide updates on existing constraints, and then discuss any escalation of unresolved constraints that may impact the project. So if we know those 4 real-world categories, we need to know how that relates to the O3 application. Well, in the O3 application, we have 3 sections that we divide those users into. The package planner, which is generally going to be the WorkFace planner, and in the application is actually labeled as the planner user. We have a constraint editor, which is where you're going to see some overlap. A constraint editor could be a planner, it could be the constraint owner, it could be the planning lead, and it could even be the project manager. In O3, each constraint type can be limited to a specific role who's allowed to edit this. An example of that would be a safety constraint. That could be limited to a user with the safety role. Then lastly, we have constraint owners in O3. Those constraint owners are going to be labeled as the assigned to user. It can be just about anyone in the application. Who this is depends on the type of constraint that we are discussing. And they can also be automatically assigned when a constraint is created. So we've lined up the real life people with users in the O3 application. So what about constraints in O3? Well, let's start with what a constraint can be assigned to in the application. Some examples of that would be your packages, as we discussed, construction work packages, installation work packages, engineering work packages, but it's not limited to that. You can also add constraints to documents, drawings, systems, or scaffolding. And once you create once you decide what a constraint needs to be assigned to, you need to define what those actual constraints are. In O3, we're going to provide you with a lot of versatility so you can design those constraints to be as specific or generic as you like. An example would be on some of my projects, they create material constraints that just list the full list of constraints that need to be cleared and whether or not they're available. Whereas other projects are going to list each material as its own constraint. Now, in O3, it all starts with our types. You can use constraint types in O3 to group all your constraints together. And you can name those basically however you like to fit in with your project. As a project manager, I'll help you design those constraint types when we're configuring your application to get started on your project. A few commonly seen examples would be your engineering constraint types, materials, safety, even technical verification and physical verification. Another common use of our constraint types is to group them together by due dates. In O3, you can automatically generate a due date on a constraint based off the planned start date. The only constraint type that is automatically added to the application for you before we get started are your predecessors. An example of a predecessor would be another installation work package. So if you associate one installation work package as a predecessor to another, it's going to automatically be created as a constraint to that work package. Well, great. Now we know what constraints are and how they apply to O3. So let's go through the life of a constraint. These workflows are going to consist of these required steps: constraint creation, assignment, and completion. Now, constraints can be edited or delayed, but these are not required parts of the workflow. The first 2 steps can be manually created or automated. And if they are automated, generally you're going to have your standard pack of constraints that will be added to every package of that type. Most commonly, though, I see on my projects, they use a combination of both manual and automated created constraints. Whether it's manual or automated is going to be determined on the constraint type configured by myself or your admin users. So let's look at the first step. Creation of the work package. If manually created, the planner will add the constraints as needed. If you're going to automate this process, you can have all those constraints automatically created when the package is created. The other option is to have those constraints automatically created when you transition the work package from one status to another. This last option is going to help incorporate constraint management into other workflows such as approvals. An example of this on one of my projects, the same one using those technical and physical verifications. They actually do not want any constraints to be available or seen on a work package until the first round of approvals are completed. So because of that, you won't see any constraints until you transition from the status where you have to clear those approvals into the next status, and that's the first time you will actually see any constraints created for that work package. Well, once those constraints are created, then they need to be assigned. And like the creation of the constraints, an assignment can be manual or it can be automated. Both these processes can be done at the same time as a creation. If it is an auto assignment, those auto assignments can also be determined based on the contract, discipline, or purpose. So an example of that, I have a project where they have, at this point, 11 contracts on the project. When the IWP is created, they will force you to assign that to a specific contract. And based on that contract, it's going to assign the constraints to a certain user. And that's also based on the constraint type being created for those packages. Now, through automation or manually creating these assignments, you can assign it to one individual. You can also assign it to a pre-configured group of individuals, or you can assign it to an entire role. Now, during this whole process, you will have the ability to edit those constraints. And you can limit who's allowed to edit the constraints based on a role, or you can even limit it to the person who's assigned to the constraint. However, eventually you are going to have to clear these constraints. And a very helpful part of O3 is the ability to clear these constraints through My Actions. My Actions is a grouping of the constraints that are assigned to you that are easily accessible. Now, you may take too long, or maybe the constraint just becomes more urgent. So we do give the option of users to click the needs verification button. This is just a way to notify the user that the constraint is assigned to that it's time to get this completed. However, that is not manual, or that is not mandatory. And eventually, you will have to complete these constraints. So the person assigned to this constraint is going to have to complete the work needed to verify the constraint is completed. And at that point, all they do is go to their My Actions, open up the constraint, and click the completed button. So that completes the workflow of the constraint. And through that process, constraint creation to assignment to completion, you are automatically collecting that data in O3. This is not going to require any other steps by your users. With the creation of constraints, you automatically have that data. And that data provides real-time reporting, accurate reporting, and a reporting that's always available. This data is represented in O3 as a constraint matrix or in pre-configurable dashboards. So the first one, your constraint matrix, is a grid view in the O3 application. In this grid view, you have access to all constraints in the O3 application. They're sorted by package type, so by your installation work packages, by your engineering work packages. And you can choose to view just the open constraints if you like, or you do also have the option to view all constraints, open or closed. All grids in O3 have very dynamic filtering capabilities. A couple examples, you can filter by the due date, you can filter by the person assigned to, or you can filter by the actual package. Now, after you filter this however you like and you view the data that you'd like to see, you do have the option to also print that data as an Excel document. The next option to view this data reporting is through dashboards. Dashboards, as mentioned, are pre-configured This is something that as a project manager, I will help you get started. But we also have templates built into the application to help you design these dashboards right out of the box. The dashboard is made up of widgets. There are many widgets in the O3 application specific for constraint management. And depending on the widgets that you use would determine the information and the users that you'd like to show this information to. So a couple examples of these dashboards would be an individual reporting dashboard. So this is a dashboard that's only going to be useful to the individual that's viewing it. A couple widgets on these dashboards would be the Assign to Me widget, which just shows some data that's assigned to them, constraints that are past due, constraints that are coming due, as well as their recent activities in the O3 application. The next dashboard I'd like to discuss is one specific to a manager. So manager reporting dashboard is going to be data a little bit higher up, and it's going to be data that a manager might use to lead their weekly meetings, as well as just keep track of the day-to-day process. These dashboards may consist of widgets that show open constraints versus planned start dates, might show constraints assigned to specific companies, or even show you the number of constraints that are unassigned. The last type of dashboard is our executive reporting dashboard. So this is another level up from the manager. Again, this may just be to keep the executives informed, or be another dashboard that you can use to lead meetings. This executive level dashboard may be used to show project total constraints, constraints grouped together by constraint type, or the total amount of blocking constraints. Now, these are three examples. All of these reports, these dashboards can be overlapping, and you do have complete control to redesign these to best suit your needs. So let's sum up today's webinar. There are a few things that I hope that you have learned from this webinar. The first is that O3 can provide more accountability through constraint management. You can offer more accountability because management will know who and when all constraints have been assigned. Also, O3 is fully auditable, so any changes are available at any point through a nice clean report. Next takeaway is process support. And O3 offers process support through grouping constraints together by type and by due dates. It also offers increased productivity. This is through our My Actions. My Actions allows you to manage constraints assigned to you all in one simple place by opening one screen. Also, that screen is accessible anywhere you have internet access. Next, we have better collaboration. That's through our specialized constraint review meeting tools, and everybody has access to this real-time data at any point. We'll provide increased efficiency through automation. Remember, O3 can do half the work for you. And the last key takeaway is the decision support. Let O3 lead your weekly meetings with O3 dashboards configurable for any situation. So when you're using O3, you should feel confident in the process that O3 provides. Not only because although the application has evolved from real world experiences, we've always had these constraint management best practices in mind. Well, that completes my discussion for today. Mandy, I'll now turn it back over to you for questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. We are doing this webinar a little bit differently today and not hosting it live, but we were able to go around and collect just some questions that are pretty common with our project management team and some things that I thought would be good to add to the discussion today. So I'm going to ask you just a few questions if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so one of the questions we often get is, do you recommend or have out-of-the-box suggestions on the best types of constraints that should be automated?
Absolutely. Through my experience with the many projects that I've helped implement with O3, I have some suggestions for best practices with constraint types. as well as CII best practices to design those constraint types. And I will help configure those through the implementation process.
Okay, great. The next one, in the presentation, you mentioned technical and physical verifications for constraints. Can you talk about what you mean by technical and physical verifications?
Absolutely, yeah, and that is a unique example to one of my projects. I haven't seen that across any others. And how they use it, they have a constraint to verify when resources are available, but just knowing that they are available doesn't mean that they are physically on location. So the first step is technical verification. Then a little bit closer to the planned start date, they're going to have physical verification where they actually verify that those resources, material, manpower, equipment is actually on site and ready to be used to complete that package.
All right, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so on the reporting side, are the reports already created, or can I create my own report?
So those reports are not already created. We do have some templates to help you get started, as well as a project manager, I'm going to help design those to suit your needs. But we do give you the ability to configure those dashboards to fit any need that you might have. And we do have over 400 widgets available to design your widgets specific to your needs.
Okay, and last one, and this one seemed to, I think we got that from a couple of project managers. A common question we get asked is, can everyone view everyone else's constraint?
Yeah, that is a common question. Most people do not want any user to have access to every constraint or all the data in the application. So you can restrict that based on the user's roles, as well as restrict that based on the contract that that user has access to. So a user may have access to one contract. They will not be able to see constraints if they are assigned to contracts that they do not have access to.
Okay, thanks. So that just about gets us to the end of the time that we have blocked for today's session. I really want to thank Mike for your time today, and thank everyone who was able to watch along with us at some point in the day, or even in future recordings of this. We will have this posted on our website. We are doing something a little differently. So instead of taking live questions, what we thought we would do is have our project managers available to answer your questions directly through the website on our web chat feature, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of our website. So after you listen to this recording, if you log on to www.o3.solutions, you can use the little chat bubble in the bottom right of your screen and submit a question at any time, and that goes for our global clients as well. You can submit the question and we'll get back to you within a few hours. We really appreciate that you have spent your time with us today, and we hope that you have a wonderful and productive remainder of your day. Thanks so much.